This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Find great deals faster.
Hello and welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. This podcast is designed by real people on their journey to achieving financial freedom, and we'll focus on people who've either already attained it, who are joining us on that journey, or maybe a specialist topic that can help you build your technical knowledge to achieving and maintaining that financial freedom. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by Property Portfolio Building. Today's episode is one of our technical topics where we talk about all things small-scale development. Today is a really, really important topic in the fact that it's probably one of the key benefits, but also risks to your project.
Yeah, I'd say one of the two major risks. Small-scale development.
Well, it's not even small scale if you're in any property, right? Yeah. And that is finance. So the title of the topic is Finance, the Game of Two Halves. And throughout this, we will demonstrate why it's a game and why it's also a game with a first half and a second half. But before we start, we're talking about finance, so we have to give this as a disclaimer. This is not financial advice. This is based on real-time experiences in our developments and the developments we do for our clients. It's focused on small-scale development. Always do your own research. Always take legal advice whenever you're entering into any finance agreements. And we're not FCA regulated in any way, shape, or form. So we're not providing you with anything that should be deemed as formal advice. So that out of the way. Let's talk about it, shall we? Right. Yep. So you can't do a project without money. That is the fundamental line of things, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to focus.
Doesn't have to be all your money, though.
It doesn't have to be your money. But you need money, right? So money makes
funds.
the world go round. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're financing a project, so we are talking today exclusively about small-scale development. However, it will be relevant if you're just doing a refinance or you're doing your first bridging purchase, you're not actually doing any improvement works. A lot of this stuff is still going to be relevant, right?
Yeah, it works at all levels from, your small single let refurbishment projects or purchases up to your large developments. All the fundamentals are similar.
Yeah, and it's really impactful if you're doing it yourself as well. So if you're in a big team, you're a contractor, you're going to know this stuff, right? Or you're going to have people that know this stuff. Whereas if you are a small landlord developer, as it says is the common term, it's you. You are the person who's going to have to do this thing, right? Yeah. So we're just going to use a typical project for us as an example. So I'm just going to use a 150 as an easy number. So a project that we potentially purchased and we're going to renovate. So small scale development, we're going to renovate a property. So the scenario is the property is going to cost $150,000 to buy and $150,000 to renovate, right? So we're not going to talk about how we came into those budgets or any of those types of things. We're just going to talk about financing.
They're just example figures. They're
not real in any way, shape, or form. But it comes to a nice round figure of 300,000, which is nice, So, and we're also going to talk about just a few differences between if you're doing a small scale development and it's a HMO versus a small-scale development, and you go into flats. There's a little bit of a planning impact. There's a little bit of a building control impact. So those things do overlap into what we're going to talk about because it's important when it comes to finance. But most importantly is how we're going to start the analysis and then end the project, right? So, Tim, why is it a game of two halves?
It's a game of two halves because you when you're looking to purchase the property, you need to finance the purchase, and then you need to finance, if you're doing conversion refurbishment works, you then need to finance, those works and all the fees, professional fees, legal fees, and all those other fees associated. So in essence, the purchase and raising the funds for all those elements is the first half. Yeah. Yeah. And then the second half is basically let's say you're bridging finance for cash and you've finished the refurbishment conversion works, you're then looking to move on to a traditional mortgage product for that sort of finished product. That's the second half. Or sell it, yeah. So you're either selling it or mortgaging it or whatever. That's the second half of this finance game that we're talking about.
Yeah, so the first half is all about getting into the project. The second half is all about getting out of the project.
The exit.
Yeah, the exit, whether it's onto a product and you're going to keep the property. We tend to keep stuff. Yeah. But we have had experience of selling as well. So we can talk about those two things and some slips, chips, and falls regarding the differences.
Exactly.
But okay, first half. The first half of doing your finance for small scale development. How can you finance a purchase first and foremost? How can you actually physically finance that?
So if you've got a property that's in a poor condition, it requires work or something like that, traditionally you're not going to purchase it with a mortgage, basically. So the traditional mortgage you can't use because that product's not designed for that. So the only two other options outside of that are a full cash purchase.
Yeah.
Or using what's called bridging finance. They're the two options at that point for purchase.
It's a good point you raise, actually, because one of the triggers in our sales and sourcing environment is if we viewed a property, we make an offer on a property and we believe it's not mortgageable for any reason, and we lose out on that property, but we then ask the agent, what is the tenant profile? What is the buyer profile? And if it's somebody who it's just a family or somebody's going to move in,
or a first-time buyer,
we know
it's a high risk that they won't be able to purchase.
That deal's likely going to fall out.
Yeah,
right.
Unless they've got cash, which a lot of young couples will not have.
Yeah,
it's very likely they're not going to be able to go through with it because the mortgage company just won't lend against it.
Yeah, and it's getting more stringent, right? So there's more stringent on what will and what won't pass for a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
So what are the key things that you think about when you think about that? Is it mortgageable?
So is it in a good condition? Has it got a functioning kitchen? Has it got a functioning bathroom? Are there any defects associated with the property? Is there roof defects, window defects, all these sort of things? Is the EPC rating a low rating, like an F or something like that? Yeah, lower than E. So all those factors would mean that a mortgage company just want a property that's in good condition that will rent out any day of the week, or you could live in it as a house or a family home.
Yeah, so there's a little tip there. If you've done that as an investor and you've lost out on the deal, ask what the buyer profile is.
Yeah.
Because we've got a follow-up process through the sales environment, but we also write to the seller.
Yeah.
Right at that point, say, listen.
Yeah, if you explain it to the agent and they're not understanding,
they're not interested,
and they're not interested in talking to you. Sometimes you can just write to the owner of the property and say, just so you're aware, we understand it's a first-time buyer buying it. Unfortunately, we don't think they'll be able to complete with it because, say, there's subsidence in the property. We've factored the cost for that into our offer. Yeah. If there's a problem, get in touch and stuff like that. It's a bit of a tip.
You don't need to restart the process. You can just give us a ring on this number and we will do the deal. Yeah. And that works.
Yeah. And we get quite a lot. We get quite a lot of deals that come back that way for sure.
Cool. Right. So where do you start then? Treat me like a 5-year-old. Where do I start?
So you start with initially is what funds have you got available of your own funds? And then that will kickstart as to, or what funds you think you can raise, through other investor finance and things like that. And then you go, this is the funds I want to use as cash funds. So this means that I'm either using all cash or part cash, or I need to, work with another bridging finance company. And then you work back from there. But you need an appraisal document set up that you can plug in all these figures, know what cash is needed, what the bridging costs would be if you're using bridging finance, what the rates are, what the other fees are. And then when you view a property, all of those numbers, you just put the purchase price, like you said, 150. Yeah. The cost of, say, the design and the refurbishment works 150, and then all the other figures will tally up and give you an estimated return and all those sort of things as a result.
So you need to appraise it.
Yeah.
And you need to understand your personal financial situation and what you can actually put into the project. What we see a lot of people come from courses. What do you see as the big thing that people miss out on in these when they've attended a course? So they get taught in a certain way, right?
So a lot of courses say that you can find deals, you don't need the money, you can find the deal and then the money will just come to you. I don't know if I agree with that specifically. I think you always need a plan for the funds, whether you got funds or you're raising or you've talked to people, you got a plan that if I'm going to go and view this property, I know that I need X amount of funds to deliver it. Yeah. And I've either got those funds or I know where I can get them from. I've got a joint venture partner that's ready to go or an investor that's ready or something like that. Whereas I think the course might lead you and they go, just find the deal and the money will magically come. Yeah. The problem is you find the deal and it's sometimes you've got to get back to the agent very quickly. And it's what's the company and all these sort of things. And you're panicking. It's
proof of funds.
Yeah, proof of funds straight away. It's this course told me that the money would just come to me magically, but it's unfortunately not the case sometimes. So that's there's
also the balance on the appraisal as well, which is, I was taught certainly, and it's not wrong, but it isn't right. technically right, which is if I'm doing a development and I only have to put in a deposit of 30%.
Yeah, so there's other things. So for bridging finance, there's something called retained interest. So if you've got a 12-month bridging loan, the lender will generally want 12 months of the interest paid upfront.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can pay monthly, but you have to really demonstrate that you've got high income or high cash flow to cover it. But yeah, generally you need 12 months of interest up front. And there's also all the other fees associated. Is there arrangement fee? Is there an admin fee? There's extra solicitors that work for the lenders. So you got your solicitor, and then you got their solicitor you got to pay for. Valuation surveys. So there's lots of extra things that you've got to build in.
So you mentioned valuation survey there again, because it's not just the fees, it's the cap. Things are capped, right? Your lending is actually capped.
Yeah, so in essence, for this project example we're talking about at the moment, let's say a house converting to a 5 or 6 bed, probably a 6 bed HMO with the figures you're saying, you can generally get up to 70% of the purchase.
With one of our builders.
Yeah, with one of our builders. Up to 70% of the purchase price for bridging.
Yeah.
And then up to 100% of the development works.
And that's what you get taught, right?
But then, like you said, it gets capped at the final GDV value. And a lot of lenders will cap it at 65% of the final GDV value based on the initial valuation survey, which is the first half of the finance we're talking about.
And that's why it's 2 halves, right?
Yeah, because you get a valuation survey on purchase they will look at the purchase price, and also the final GDV for everyone is gross development value. So they might say, yeah, we agree with your purchase price of 150. We think the final GDV will be 320,000, but we actually think it should be 350. And the reason we think it's 350 is because we think we can get higher rents, and we're giving a really good product at the end of it. And also, this valuation phase is just going to be more conservative at the front end because they don't see the final product, they don't have the final ASTs in place, and all these sort of things. So they're just going to be a little bit more conservative than they need to be. You've
alluded there to something that's mainly focused on our area, which is because we go for in our products, a lot of our products are refinanced onto commercial and commercial hybrid products.
Yeah,
it's not the same for everywhere in the UK, right? So some places in the UK, the value is in the bricks and mortar. Yeah, so some areas down south of England, the actual residential bricks and mortar value might actually be higher than what the commercial valuation from the rental income. And that's because if you take a derelict building there and add the build cost to that, the increase in the value of a done up building versus a derelict building is significantly more, right?
Yeah.
So then if you're refinancing it, you might be taking a more buy-to-let, allowing mortgage at the end, allowing a HMO, or allowing blocks of flats or a single let. Whereas on our side, if we're doing a small scale development and it's a HMO or it's a block of flats, that value add is the true value is in the difference in the yield.
Yeah, the rental income.
The rental income. Yeah, absolutely.
And the cash flow it provides, basically.
Absolutely. So
compared to the house next door that's got a family living in it or something like that.
Exactly. So we have more commercial valued products than we do residentially valued products because of that.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the houses on the street might only, you might have bought it at 150 because it's derelict. The ones on the street might be 200, but you've got to spend 100 on the build, right? So, and it's not going to be valued the same because that house on the street might get you £800 to £1,000 in rent, whereas ours.
But ultimately, they're different products, aren't they? The 3-bed house with 1 bathroom.
Yeah,
it's a very different product to a 5-bedroom house with 5 bathrooms. It's that's only going to be used by. It's only going to be a multi-let property HMO.
Yeah.
It's only going to be an investor that buys it.
Yeah.
The house can be first-time buyer. It could be a buy-to-let property. It could be those sort of things. But it's a different product.
And we'll talk about that for a second then, about that, because we're going to talk about, so we are going to talk about small-scale development as a whole, but this HMO element. So HMOs is our most popular product as a developer for our clients. We also have our own portfolio, which HMOs are also our most popular for us, but from a hold perspective for cash flow. Obviously, we have single lets and stuff for cash flow and capital improvement, but we like the cash flow of the HMOs. So we're going to talk about that specifically for a moment, because when you're planning your small scale development, if you're wanting to exit onto one of these things, you've got to be careful, right? You've got to be careful on what you develop, because if you have your house is too small, or you don't develop it in the way you just said, which is it's a 5-bedroom, 5 ensuite product, right? That you are as a minimum, you are
you need to develop
risks,
a
right?
product which is gonna get the exit value that you're expecting and the rental cash flow return that you expect. So if you're like you said, if you've got a big house but you're converting it to a 5-bedroom, 2-bathroom, maybe that's not so much of a commercial hybrid property because it's more similar to a house. The 5th or 4th bedrooms, they could be a living room as well. They could be a dining room, really.
Yeah, it's just a bed versus a couch, right?
Yeah, exactly. You might have to put fire doors in and fire alarms and stuff like that. But yeah, it could be a house quite easily. Whereas your 5-bedroom or your 6-bedroom with 5 or 6 bathrooms and en suites, it's very different. It's
and there are certain lenders that won't even allow 5 and 6 bed with en suites, right?
Yeah. So you need to know the lenders that can lend on your product. So very important to talk to brokers and know who the lenders are at the back end, and then the bridging companies that understand that on the front end as well.
And I would say talk to brokers that are doing that product.
Yeah.
Because again, you in the first half of your finance product, one of the slips, trips and falls, and we've certainly had that experience in our very early days. Not all finance products are the same. Not all brokers are the same. Correct?
Yeah, there's variance all over the place, and definitely.
Whole of market only means I have a product in each area. So I might have one bridging product, and that ticks I can offer bridging finance.
Yeah,
as a broker. Whole of market isn't I know every lender, because that's in my mind.
So it's a good point, actually. So the good thing about doing bridging is like you have to sort of do this check in the first place with the bridging lender, because they have to be comfortable that you're going to exit at the end. But if you are doing one of these sort of developments, but you're fully cash funding, you don't really need approval from anyone. So you could develop something that you might not be able to exit on the back end. So it's very important that you check with a broker if you're going to move on to a mortgage that the lender's out there and it suits.
Yeah, and we see that, right? We had somebody approach us recently about cash development that they were doing, where they put a really poor planning application in as well, and they're looking to exit onto a mortgage. And we said no to helping that individual out.
Yeah.
From a project management point of view, because he then wanted us to help with the refinancing, and we just thought you've not planned it properly from the start, and you've put all this money.
It's a fairly risky application that went in, unfortunately, and stuff like that. So again, it really comes down to knowing these developments, working with the experts, and
So the first half is all about being prepared.
Yeah.
Right. So, so there's the ways that you can finance your property purchase and your development. That's what we're looking at here. So it's that funding of that £300,000 plus the interest plus the fees.
Yeah.
So and then knowing that your product at the end of that will be valuable enough that you can borrow what you need to borrow. So like you mentioned 65%. So if my end valuation, a GDV valuation is like limited, my loan is limited to 65% of that, and my end GDV is 350,000, then I'm not able to borrow 300,000. And that is, and I'm not able to borrow 70% and 100%, which is what we get taught. I'm only able to borrow up to that 65%.
Yeah, so in your appraisal, you need to, cap the amounts and know what it's going to be valued by the valuation surveyor with that bridging purchase.
And be realistic on that.
Yeah.
And this is why it's a game of two halves, because you're going to get two valuations.
Yeah, because in our appraisal document, we had the first half, which is the bridging appraisal, and then we have the second half, which is the refinance. And the bridging is always more conservative and lower for that reason. And we are realistic based on those initial valuations.
Yeah.
So the other thing to consider, so obviously, like you said, there's about 300,000 you need plus fees and stuff like that. So you can get that with bridging finance talked about. Also, you will always need some of your own funds or someone else's funds to a certain extent for the deposit, the retained interest, and all the fees and stuff like that. So one thing to consider as well is, I think recently I added up like the percentage of some of the bridging costs once you add up the fees, everything like that. So bridging, the interest rate might be say 1% a month. So that's 12% for the interest. But then when you add on all the fees associated, once you tally it up, it's more like 16 or 17% all in or something like that for these sort of developments. So it is quite pricey. So you can use private investor funds, obviously in a very responsible way, and understand the risks associated and all those sort of things. But even if they're getting a return that is below the 16, 17%, it still could be another better option to look at.
Stop the podcast now. This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Property Filter is the #1 property tool for today's property professional. It brings in all the data points and sources from all the property portals and auction sites into one convenient place. Then you have the option to overlay all the clever strategies found in the property filter blueprint to find motivated sellers faster. Now, we use it on a daily basis. It saves us over 80% of our time when looking for properties. And if that sounds like something that you want in your lives, please go to register.property-filter.co.uk/PPB, which is the discount code for this podcast. You will get 2 weeks free and a discount on your first month. That's it from me. Back to the podcast.
Well, let's talk about that then. So let's talk about using private investors. So you mentioned before, because a lot of people look to do this, right? And it's a common thing where I'm doing a development, I'm going to borrow some money to help me fund things. And generally speaking, if you're in the first half of your finance and you're borrowing, you're doing one of two things. Well, you're doing one of three things. You're either borrowing for a deposit, plus the purchase cost, or you're borrowing for the development element, and maybe a combination of the first two things.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say the deal was £300,000 total. The difference being, if you're using bridging, you're going to be capped at 65%.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you're borrowing with private finance, you could technically borrow the whole thing. Technically.
Yeah.
Whether that's responsible to do will then depend on what the end valuation would be.
Yeah.
Because if your end valuation is then,
But if you don't have a bridging lender and you're borrowing it as private finance, you can give that lender full security of first charge.
Yeah,
on
exactly.
The property.
Yeah, exactly. So you can give the first charge.
So it's not too bad for the lender because they have the first charge. They become the bank basically.
And for those that aren't entering into this, that don't really understand charges, because I didn't necessarily. And obviously, the first charge is basically saying, on this property, although this person is technically the owner, before they can take any money from the property, there is a charge against that property that has to be paid back first. And that is a first charge. And then if somebody takes a second charge on that property, it basically, at the land registry, this person is technically the owner. However, there is a first charge that has to be paid back first. And then there is a second charge that has to be paid back first. And then then anything else from that is the equity that can be paid to the owner.
Yeah.
Technically, that's how it works.
Exactly.
So a first charge. So if you're using a bridging lender, then they nearly always want a first charge.
Yeah, so they will take a first charge and they will also take a personal guarantee if it's bought in a limited company. To get security against the owner.
If you're a limited company.
If the company was to fold or something like that.
Yeah, so they're lending to you as an individual.
Yeah,
right?
you're fully liable as an individual.
Yeah. So, but if you're a private investor, so let's look at this scenario where you're borrowing the whole thing and you can give a first charge, that's no problem. But what if you can't borrow the whole thing? A lot of people look to raise private finance, but they can't borrow the whole thing against the development.
Yeah, so you could use bridging development finance and then borrow private investor finance for the deposit amount and the funds that are needed. Some lenders will still need you to put some of your own money in as a percentage. Yeah. Some not necessarily.
I see regularly 10%.
10% seems to be So let's say you need £100,000 of separate money to bridging development finance. Yeah, as an owner, you might need to put 10% in, so 10k.
Yeah. But it's really important that you understand how you're going to exit, right? So you can pay all these people back.
Yeah.
And
be confident of the valuations at the back end and what the build's going to achieve and what the rents are going to achieve, and be really realistic.
And obviously, the more you borrow, the more interest you pay, the more costly your deal.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that is the case.
Yeah. Because we say that all the time with a lot of clients is like, what sort of return can I get? And the first question is, have you got all the cash to fund it? Because for this example we're talking about, it's probably £45,000 roughly that's going to the bridging company throughout that development. Whereas if you're fully cash funding it, let's
break that down though. So if you're using full bridging and development finance, so you're bridging both the purchase and the development.
Yes.
So you're putting in your 30% deposit plus any extra based on the GDV restriction of 65%.
Plus retained interest.
Plus retained fees. Interest plus fees. You paid
plus
all that out.
Professional costs. Yeah.
Which it's so all of that kind of, we worked all that out. So you are effectively funding, I would say, 45% of the deal.
Yeah, maybe 40.
Yeah,
45.
of the deal, because they're 65% restricted.
Yeah.
So you might be able to get 55% funded and then the difference is the fees and the interest.
Yeah.
Right.
So in this example, you're saying you might need 130,000 of
exactly.
Separate funds, the bridging development finance.
Yeah. And that's the difference, isn't it? That's a far cry from borrowing 30%, because borrowing 30% is 50 grand.
Yeah.
You know, so the difference there is 120 to 130 grand, which is what you actually need.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's what trips a lot of people up, I think. And then, like you said, it could be up to like 40 to 45,000 pounds in costs to use that lender, right?
Yeah, in interest and all the fees associated.
Yeah. And the classic, you can get all your money out on a deal, right? So if you're doing a deal which is 300 grand in development for purchase and works, let's say, and then you're adding 45,000 pounds in lending cost.
Yeah.
It's that surely we're in
very, very difficult.
Dreamland.
Very, very difficult to get all your funds out. You know, you could do a really good deal with cash and get your funds out. But then, you know, if you're using bridging development finance, you've got 50 grand left in maybe or something like that, because that's what you're paying the bridging lender.
Yeah.
So the return,
you've got to pay for that lender. Yeah. It comes out of your deal. Right?
So the advantages of using bridging development finance, less of your own funds or someone else's funds are needed. So you're leveraging, you could possibly do more deals at a time, but you will not get as high a return on investment as fully cash funding. They're the pros and cons of it.
Yeah. So, and then if you did all cash and it was all your own money, you're saving that 45,000, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, and the classic that we see, and we say to some of our clients as well, because we're lucky to have some clients who can fully fund projects, right?
Yep.
And then they say, oh, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 3 projects with that. And I think to myself, that's good if you need the cash flow in the next 12 months.
Yes.
But it will slow you down in your overall longer term plan, because every deal is going to cost you 45 grand.
Yeah.
So of that 300 grand pot that you may have that you could fully fund one deal with, you're losing, you know, what is it, 135,000
So
of that?
if your goal is to get to a cash flow goal quickly, because you want to leave your job in 12 months time or something, you know, it's probably, you can use a lot more bridging development finance because you can leverage more and do more deals at a time.
Yeah.
So in 2021, I did exactly that. I did 10 deals, all with bridging development finance, but I had a goal to leave my job in 2021.
Yeah, and just on that note, Tim's only 22 years old, so you don't want to do that in 1 year.
Very, very stressful, exactly, while trying to work a full-time job as well.
Lost 10 years of his life, but got 10 deals done.
So I do not recommend it, but it got me to that goal.
Yeah.
If after a few years, because I spent a lot on bridging, you know, maybe I would have been better off if I just said, I could have kept working that job for 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah.
I wouldn't change it, because then we started, you know, property portfolio and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you know, there's things to weigh out like that.
It was the right thing for you at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the best returns versus least returns at the end of this, just to give people the examples.
Yeah.
So we're going to finish the first half now.
Yeah.
That's good. So where we are, but we're actually going to finish it by talking about why it's still tough, because you've done your appraisal works, you've done it correctly, which is at a 65% or 70% gross loan to value. You've worked in your interests, you've worked in your bridging costs, you've worked in your private investor funds. You know what your return's going to be, and you're happy that you can pay everybody back. You've had your valuation, and your valuation survey broadly agrees, and we'll talk about valuation survey in a second, broadly agrees with your appraisal, because you've been conservative in your initial appraisal. And you can still at that point not be successful in securing funding if you're using a lender. So what are the slips, trips and falls in making sure that you are as lendable as possible?
Yeah, so if you're new to investing, like if you haven't done a HMO before, obviously that might limit what sort of lenders you work with.
Yeah.
But the key thing is you need experienced team around you, because if you think the risk from a lender perspective is like, who's delivering this project, who's the project managers, who are the builders, who are the architects, all these key team members. So you basically, if you haven't done this development yourself, you have to leverage the skill set of those.
Yeah.
If you don't have those people, it's going to be very challenging to.
One of the first things you get asked is the CV of the team.
Yeah.
Right. Both of the person who's going to own the property and be the borrower, but also the team behind it.
Yeah.
Right. They ask for that straight away.
Yeah. Very, very important to have know who your team is, have the CVs of those, and know that you can leverage the skill set of those teams, because that's really important. There's also key things that need to be complete at that point. The first thing the lenders will ask is like, what's the schedule of works? What are the drawings? What's the cost breakdown of the development works and all these sort of things. And if you don't have that team on board and ready to go, you can't provide that info. They might not lend to you.
Exactly. So it's not just a case of having a good appraisal, it's having the project ready to go.
Yeah.
So
in all aspects.
So if you've bought an auction, as an example, you need to complete a purchase and you've already signed a contract for sale.
Yeah.
And you've exchanged contracts, they're going to want to see everything quickly. Like you said,
and building contracts as well. Sometimes they're like, we need the full final building contract.
Who's your builder?
Yeah. The tender pack. What's the tender pack? All those sort of things. So really important. And then
so they want the CV's experience. They want to know the scope of works. They want a cost plan. Of the scope of works. They want to see when those drawdown
schedules, cash flow forecasts.
They want to see your contingency that you've got, and then you've got to work through the paperwork. So even when you've got those things, next part's the paperwork, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to talk paperwork. So there's one unique piece of paperwork, which is if you are borrowing some private funds as well as mixing your own funds in, or you're borrowing funds for a deposit.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, it's best to tell your lender you're doing that and make sure you've broken oaths from the start.
Yeah, so the legal paperwork's in place for that to sign off.
Because there's a contract that your private investor will likely have to sign, which is written by the devil, because effectively they're lending you money, right? So they're lending money to your company for your property project.
Yeah.
They need to sit behind the primary lender.
Yeah.
So the primary lender will send them something called, I think it's called a deed of subordination, I think is the technical term.
Yeah.
And your private investor will have to sign it. And now we when we did one of our development projects, very, very early days, we didn't know that, right? So when we then sent the deed of subordination over for signature, that was a problem then, because our private investors were like, whoa, this says there's so much additional risk. And
because if you read it, it scare
like
people off. Basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you basically need to explain to the private investor what it really means is the bridging company or the bank always get paid back first.
Yeah,
you get paid after them.
Yeah,
and then we'll get paid last. So what you can do is in your loan agreement with your investor, just say, obviously you're lending in conjunction with a first charge lender. They get paid back first. You'll get paid back before we take our equity. That's the way to help the lender and put comfort with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is,
and you can actually give second charges as well. So there's obviously a legal document you need to do with that. So if you've got a lender that sits behind the first charge, then you can give them second charge. And
there's an additional cost for that. Legal cost.
There's additional legal cost for that as well. So
and your primary lender will probably want some administrative fees as well to accept it.
So you need to weigh it up. Is it worth doing that or not? Or in your loan agreement, is it you just explain that they get paid back second?
Yeah.
And that's part of the loan agreement.
Okay, so at that point, we've got everything done. So the appraisal's fine. We've got our scope of works. We've done our cost schedules.
So there's other key requirements there as well. So as the lender, obviously they'll do credit checks. Look at your credit profile. They will look at information, about the deal and how it stacks, and also your own income and all those different factors. A lender will look at those sort of things.
And if you've got anything in your past or your history, address it up front. Because it's not necessarily a showstopper, right? And I see this all the time, but don't let it run to the end and then say, oh, by the way, I once had a CCJ, or I closed a company 5 years ago, or something like that. Just tell the broker. If you've got a good broker. That's so important at this point.
And explain it to them.
Explain it to them so they can speak to the underwriters about the risk balances, and then because there might be something that you need to do, which is provide a letter of guarantee that you don't owe funds to a liquidated company, or that the CCJ has been settled and you can get some paperwork for that, or any of those things that you can do, you will get them done early,
better
right?
being upfront about it.
Yeah, 100%. Because otherwise they're just going to go at the last minute. No. And you've spent so much money by that point.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. If you want to get in touch with us about today's podcast or any of the topics, learning topics that we've gone through today, you can email us at podcast@invest-prop.co.uk or get in touch with us with whichever your social media platform of choice is. If you think you would add value to us as a guest on this podcast, you can please get in touch and let us know what you would be able to talk to us about. Other than that, we wish you well on your financial freedom journeys. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.